friends. Welcome back to the Old Fashioned on Purpose podcast. So today I want to talk about a topic. I don't know if we've covered it a whole lot, at least directly here on the podcast, but it's something that interests me in a roundabout and maybe bizarre way. And that topic is trash and how we generate trash, why we generate so much trash, and how we can start to generate less. This may not seem like an overly homestead topic at first glance, but I actually think it's very much related to homesteading and old-fashioned living. And as a homestead-minded person, you kind of have a unique ability to help with this problem and create solutions. So I am very, very excited to have with me today Eve Schaub. She just published an amazing book, which I devoured in less than 3 days, called A Year of No Garbage. This episode is brought to you by Redmond's Real Salt, which is the only salt I use for all my homestead cooking, canning, fermentation, and it's also the salt of our soda fountain restaurant. Since I can't grow salt myself, obviously, I got to buy it somewhere, and I've learned that not all salt is created equal. Having the good stuff makes a really big difference in what you're cooking, and it does affect the flavor. I have loved Redmond for years because they mine their salt here in the United States, they use sustainable practices, and it contains over 60 different trace minerals that not only make it taste really good, it's also better for you too. Now, I admit I am a complete salt nerd, so I buy mine in bulk, which just makes sense because it saves me a lot of money and salt doesn't go bad, so you can stash it in your pantry for a very long time. So if you want to give Redmond's a try, whether you're buying a shaker to test drive or you want to do a 25-pound bag like I do, head on over to theprairiehomestead.com/salt. And don't forget to use code HOMESTEAD to save 15% off. Now back to our episode. I can't think of anyone better, honestly, to speak to this topic. So welcome, Eve. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me, Jill.
So I know this is correct me if I'm wrong, your third book in this series, if you will. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. And what made you want, because I know you had Year of No Sugar, Year of No Clutter, and then Year of No Garbage. So what made you choose garbage as your third book in the series?
I like to tell people this is my third and final book in this series because I have agreed to stop torturing my family after this. They've been incredibly good sports. I've always been kind of fascinated with garbage. Is that weird?
No, I don't think it's weird at all. I actually think about it a lot too. And I have since I was a little girl, but yeah, I don't think it's weird at all. Yep.
Yeah, I mentioned in the book that I remember even when I was a little kid, putting all this stuff, and of course this was before the era of much recycling and definitely before single stream. We were putting everything in one big black garbage bag. It went in the metal can. Big nasty truck came and took it away. And I remember thinking, that doesn't seem right. Like that can't be going anywhere good, And
Right.
And I just thought it was curious, and of course, didn't think about it any further. But then, as times change and people become more concerned about the environment and recycling comes about in a more a real way. I was living in Ithaca when I encountered my first curbside recycling, and I was like, oh, very excited to be at the forefront of something progressive, and and it continues to evolve. Now we have single stream recycling, which we can talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that I'd always had. I'm sort of a very curious person by nature. I'd always been fascinated with this idea of our waste and where does it go. And now there are many people who are also talking about zero waste. And so I thought, I wonder what would it be like. It has to be possible, right, to have a completely garbage-free existence.
Yeah.
And so I roped my family into it, and I said, we're going to do this for a calendar year. And they all went, oh my God, not again.
Yeah. Your family were like,
and then they did it anyway.
They seem like such good sports. Like I felt a little bit of kinship because I've drugged my family, not as extreme, but I've drugged them on plenty of things similar. And like, man, she's got some great sports for for a family.
Totally. I do.
Yeah.
But I also liked the sort of symmetry of it, because I feel like with my first book, Year of No Sugar, I was talking about the things that we take into our bodies. And then with Year of No Clutter, I was talking about the things that we bring and keep in our homes. And then with Year of No Garbage, I was talking about the things that we put into the environment. And of course, it all comes full circle, because the things we put into the environment end up in our bodies as well.
Yes.
So I thought it was a nice sort of neat, I think 3 is a nice number. And so this is, I like this as sort of a beginning and end of my adventures. And people like to call them stunt projects, stunt memoirs. And I love that, because I'm
Yeah.
like, this is the only universe in which I get to be a stunt person.
Yeah. I know. I like that. I like that. And I think just to kind of bring it back to the homestead world, because that's kind of my podcast centers around the homestead audience and the farm friendly audience. We talk a lot about how homesteading teaches us how everything is connected, and as modern folks, we're so fragmented in thinking of our food in this compartment and our health in this compartment and the environment over here. And like homesteading wakes you up and goes, no, it's all the same. And I love that you talk about your books kind of being that full circle moment.
Absolutely. I think they're all of a piece. And I love that this gets to be my job. And I also think it was very telling whenever we were going along in our Year of No Garbage, and we were like, oh, how are we going to do this? It's always ends up being about plastic. Of course, plastic has not been around forever, so there's always been a way to do this, whatever it is. If we want to avoid this disposable, single-use, whatever, there used to be another way. And so we would look to the past and say, how do people used to do this?
Well, that was like the perfect segue. You didn't even know that that was my next question, but that was like golden. Where because I love history. I love, one of the questions I ask constantly on this podcast is, what did we do before industrialism told us otherwise? What did we do? What did our grandparents do? What did we do before this paradigm? And so you addressed that early in your book, and it initially caught my attention, and I highlighted it like crazy. You wrote, well, and then later on you wrote, in the section on paper towels, you said, it's not that big a stretch to ask, how would our grandparents have done it? So, because I'm such a nerd, could you give us a little bit of a background of, I know it's a long history, but a short history, or at least a version of how we got to be this garbage centric culture where, not that long ago, people weren't disposing of everything in their lives like we do now. So how do we go from point A to today?
Well, I think a lot of it is focused on ideas, and actually, there's a lot of parallels with sugar. At the first book that I did, and there's this drive towards convenience, towards ease, towards cheap, 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 and sugar and plastic have a lot of commonality there. These are things that are very, very profitable. They're things that we have not had in such great abundance for very long. We lived also without added sugar in our food, to a great extent. The way we have it now, not all that long ago. And so I think that you've got a lot of people don't necessarily think about the fact or realize that plastic. Which was the Darth Vader of our project.
Yes, it was. It totally
comes
was.
comes from fossil fuel. Comes from oil. And so you've got the drive for, people are now conscious of the climate change emissions that come from fossil fuels. So they're reducing their use of those things in other areas. And so big oil is now going, oh, we have to make up that we need a plan B. We need to find out how we can sell more fossil fuel in other ways. And so you've got an emphasis on, instead of fossil fuels for your car, we'll put a lot of attention and energy into how do we put plastic around every single thing that you can possibly find. Everything in the supermarket. I'm sure many people have noticed that when you go to the supermarket these days, they're putting plastic on things that, why are they even putting why are they coating this poor little avocado in plastic?
I know.
Why?
I know. Yes.
And this is not necessary, but this is a driving force in the industry. They are pushing because they see this as their backup plan. And unfortunately, we as consumers, it's very difficult to get away we've been presented with, okay, everything has to be packed in plastic. Well, it wasn't always the case. When I was a kid, I remember you could, like, and it's still the case, I can still go to the store and buy flour in a paper bag. But almost everything else is packaged in plastic in my store, and it's horrifying. It's horrifying to see, and you feel that your choices are being taken away from you as a consumer.
It really does feel like that. I know, I mean, I wouldn't call myself zero waste. I would like to be, but it's not necessarily feasible for, every part of our life. But we're pretty mindful of the waste that we're generating and what we're consuming. But even, I feel like I'm far more cognizant than the average American, but like the stuff that comes into my home, I'm like, I can't stop it. And then when it's out of control, it feels like it is forced on us in a sense, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the conclusions that I come to in the course of the book is that unless I want to like quit society and go live in a cave, I can't stop. I can't avoid purchasing plastic. I have to feed my family. I can't, I can't sufficiently get the nutrients into my household
Right.
without buying this single-use disposable plastic packaging. And so we had to find other solutions for, because we had it and we couldn't throw it away. So I was washing and drying and hanging it up or all around my kitchen. It was very festive looking.
Yes.
Like, what am I going to do with all this stuff? And there are some solutions, but unfortunately, as you will find out in the book, there's some we need to be very circumspect. Yes. And realize that when you go to forms of extreme recycling, like say mail-in recycling programs or pay-to-play recycling programs, which was what we needed to resort to. That was really the last stop was, okay, if all else fails, we will send it to this person who promises something good will happen with it. But unfortunately, there's been since our year of no garbage ended, there's been a lot of controversy about these programs, and there's been lawsuits, and there's been expose documentaries, and I came to the conclusion that it's very, very possible that what these different extreme recycling programs are promising may not be what's really happening. And so we have to go back to the beginning and say, how do we turn off the tap? How do we turn plastic production off at the source? And we do our best as we can as consumers to limit how much we're bringing into our homes. When we have a choice, make the better choice and avoid the plastic. But you can't always do it and still be a functioning member of contemporary society.
Right. Yeah. I felt your pain as you were talking about when you have friends over and they're bringing things. You're like, I'm sorry, you have to take that back home with you.
Oh yeah. I was a terrible hostess.
Yeah. The little things, like I was reading, you're such an awesome writer. It was so engaging. And in case anyone listening, this is not a dry book. This is a very entertaining and engaging book. So trash can be extremely pleasurable to read about. I promise.
I love that.
You're talking about like the little things, like the little wrappers around the bottle, the top of the bottle, and the little twisty ties. And I was like, oh no, the little things. I didn't think of that. Oh no. And it's stressful. Just even listening to you talk about it, it was stressful.
The little tiny stickers that they put on the apples.
Stickers. Oh my gosh. It's out of control. Can you, for those who haven't read the book yet, because I know they will, but can you kind of give your high level spiel of the plastic recycling industry? Because I feel like, I've had a little bit of an awareness that it wasn't quite what they're telling us it is, but I think that a lot of people still are thinking if I drop my, pop bottle in the recycling bin, it's 100% fine and it all goes where I think it's going to go. So what did you discover about the realities of recycling plastic in that single stream way?
It's really a shame. When we started our project, I was thinking, okay, but plastic, how bad could it be really? I mean, we have a single stream garbage provider. We have our bin that we use for our recycling, and we can put everything in it. And they accepted plastics 1 through 7. That's the resin identification code that most people are familiar with. It's somewhere, usually on the bottom of your plastic packaging, and it has a number inside. So the numbers go from 1 to 7. And a lot of places now do accept all of those numbers. So I thought, well, there probably won't be that much left over besides that, right? Ha 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 ha.
Right.
So number 1, there's a lot of stuff that's left over. and a lot of stuff that's very confusing that we just didn't even know what it exactly was made of. And I spent a lot of time finding out. But to go back to those things that are getting collected at the curbside and taken off somewhere, hopefully somewhere good, sad news is it's not going somewhere good. The recycling rate currently is at 5% for plastic. That's a shocking number. It's an abject failure in terms of recycling numbers. We've been trying to get better at recycling plastic since the 1970s, and we should know how to do it by now. So what that tells me is that it is not possible. Experts will tell you that plastic is not an inherent, it does not lend itself as a material to effective recycling. It doesn't do what glass and metal and paper can do. It is not infinitely recyclable. You can only try to recycle it one time, but as I said, it hardly ever even gets as far as there. You know, we think we're doing a good thing by putting it in recycling, but sadly, it's not getting where it's supposed to go. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. And the other side of that is, okay, well, if it's not getting recycled, then where is it going? 30% of the plastic produced every year ends up in our environment, in our landscape. 40% ends up being landfilled. I mean, this is atrocious, right? What's the recycling rate for cardboard? 90%. If we can recycle cardboard at a rate of 90% and we can recycle plastic, if we struggle, we can maybe think about 5%. That tells me it's an abject failure. So where is all this plastic actually going? It's unfortunately, you know, when China stopped accepting our plastic to be shipped to them for recycling back in 2017, what developed was a situation where you have people in third world countries, developing countries, all of this plastic is being shipped to them and dumped on their landscapes. And so there are plenty of documentaries, and I list some of them at the end of my book. One of them is called The Story of Plastic. When people watch this, they will be horrified to realize that there's no recycling sheriff who's going to make sure that something good happens to your plastic recycling. It's not going to get recycled. It's going to get shipped overseas. It's going to get dumped on the landscape of some impoverished people whose government does not have the infrastructure to deal with it. And you're literally going to have children playing in our discarded plastic. It's so ethically, morally upsetting. We are trying to do the right thing, and instead something horrible is happening. So countries like India, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, the list goes on, and it's truly upsetting. So if you're not upset about plastic not being recyclable in principle, you should be upset that it is going to these places and sitting in the landscapes of people who don't have proper means to deal with it.
We watched that documentary and it was very upsetting. It
is.
Like you said, everyone I think should watch it, because I think it was, you said it early in the book, you just said we just assume it goes away. It doesn't go away. There is no away.
There's nowhere for it to go.
No, it goes somewhere.
We live on a finite planet.
Yeah. And to see the kids playing in the piles, it just made me feel horrible. Ugh, it was, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So this is the thing we need to be aware of, is that the system doesn't function when it comes to plastic. Other things are functioning well, other materials, but plastic is really the big problem. And plastic is the thing that doesn't go away. Everything else can either be infinitely recycled or it will break down and go back to the environment. Plastic is a creation of civilization. It's a creation of people. And it is made to last, and boy does it ever. It never goes away.
Yeah.
And so this idea that plastic will degrade over time, it won't. It doesn't break down. The structure is such that it will break up into microparticles, into microplastics. And this is coming up more and more in the news these days, where they're doing study after study and they're finding microplastics everywhere they look. And this is very upsetting. Not only for the environment, but also for our own bodies. You know, you have babies being born and they have microplastics in their first poops.
Yes.
You know, it's extremely distressing and alarming to realize that we have created this material that nature does not know what to do with. And it's in such an abundance now that as human beings on the planet, we cannot avoid it. It is everywhere. It is at the top of Mount Everest. It is at the bottom of the Marianas Trench. It is in our lungs and our liver and our bloodstream. And plastic is not only made with fossil fuels, but it's you can't make it with fossil fuels alone. You have to also use a combination of toxic chemicals. So we're talking about heavy metals. We're talking about persistent organic pollutants. We're talking about known carcinogens, known endocrine disruptors. So all of these teeny tiny little bits of plastic that are getting into our bodies, getting into our food, getting into our bottled water, all still have all that chemistry in there as well. And so you have to imagine this is like a cocktail for disaster that we have created unwittingly.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to have you on, because I feel like maybe there could be a few listeners. You're used to my typical homesteading topics. We're talking about gardens and chickens, and you're like, I don't know why Jill's talking about this today. Because to me, like we said earlier, homesteading is all connected. And when I hear you talk about microplastics in our soil and in our water and in our newborn babies and in our bodies and in nature, like it's so unnatural. And I feel like as homesteaders, we're stewards of this. We're stewards of nature. We're stewards of the soil. We're stewards of the plants. And this is like, to me, this is a really pressing issue. Even as someone, you know, we have lots of other things to think about on the homestead. I think one thing that kind of comes as a really awesome side effect is that when we're growing more food or we're making more food, you kind of start to weed out some of those plastic options by default, which is pretty cool. And I feel like I'm hoping this interview will be, for those of you listening, just get you thinking towards other ways you can start to weed out some of those plastics and some of those unnatural materials in your life, because it does matter. And I've had people come to me and go, I just can't worry about that. I'm worried about too many other things. And I get it. I mean, we're modern people with lots of things happening, but it's really important, or at least that's how I think of it. So I think it's a topic we all need to be chewing on.
Absolutely. You know, I used to have a compost pile, but now I have a very serious compost pile.
Yes.
Because I realized I could be putting so much more stuff into it, you know. And I put, for example, I put my shredded paper out there now. I put out there the wood pellets that make up my kitty litter. I do keep that separate. Yes. I have one pile that can go, I write about that in the book actually. I have one pile for use in my garden. And because of the issue with bacteria and toxoplasmosis that's related to cat poop, if your cat, you know, has contact with animals outdoors, you can worry about that. So I have two different piles. But you can take stuff like your pizza box that has grease on it. Well, you can't recycle that in a traditional single stream, but you can put it in your compost pile. And I also realized that, you know, up until recently, I used black plastic in my garden to keep the weeds down. Yep. And I'm like, I gotta get away from that. I can't do that anymore. You know, this is too scary. This is scary. I don't want those plastics. Now that I realize what can happen, the plastics can break down. They can leach. The older plastic gets, the greater its propensity to release these chemicals that make it up. So that is yet another reason, I don't think I touched on before, that recycling plastic, you don't want to drink out of recycled plastic. Like, right. Recycled plastic is old plastic. And that means that it is going to have a greater propensity to break off microparticles, and it's going to have a greater propensity to leak this toxic chemistry, this toxic cocktail that makes it up. Yes. So I encourage people, in particular, if you take nothing away from my book or this interview, don't try to keep plastic away from your food as much as possible. That is one of the biggest things that I do now, is I try to get all the plastic out of my kitchen. I got rid of any plastic utensils. I now use glass Tupperware. And what's wonderful is you can go to your local charity shop or antique store, and they have these beautiful glass dishes that are perfect for your leftovers. You don't have to rely on modern day solutions.
Yeah. I think the kitchen is one, at least for me, has been one of the easier, I won't say the easiest, but easier places to get rid of the plastic, just because like just by default you have the glass and you have the mason jars and you have bowl. I mean, it's felt more doable there than other places in the home, at least. I want to take a minute to say thank you to this episode's sponsor, Redmond Agriculture, because they solved a major problem for homesteaders like us, and that is soil testing. In the past, it was kind of a feat to get your soil tested. You either had to do complicated tests, you had to find an obscure website online, or you had to drive to some university to drop off your sample. And Redmond's eliminated all of that trouble. You might remember me talking about them last year because they were the ones who helped me do the detective work on my potting soil drama. And if you missed all that, you can go back to a previous episode to hear that saga. But I have been in love with their kits ever since. And whether you're listening to this episode in the spring or the summer or the fall, there's really no bad time to test your soil. The more you know about what's going on in the earth under your feet and under your plants, the more empowered of a gardener you will be, and the better your harvest will be as well. So, to give their soil test a try, they are super easy to use and extremely inexpensive. Head on over to theprairiehomestead.com/soil test. And if you use code HOMESTEAD, you can get 15% off your order. Now, back to our episode.
There are a lot of places. I mean, the thing about plastic is that 40% of the plastic created each year goes towards single-use disposable packaging. Well, that seems like low-hanging fruit, right?
Right.
Like we should be able to start to address that. Durable plastic is, it's also bad, but I would argue it's less of a pressing priority to address. I think we need to start with the stuff that we can tackle most easily. And I think single-use disposable plastic is it.
Yeah, absolutely. You said something a minute ago that I wanted to circle back to. You were talking about compost and how your compost pile's gotten bigger. A lot of folks listening to this are huge compost fans, so we are in your corner on the compost. I would be curious, what would you say to someone who, because I've heard people say this, well, it doesn't matter if I throw organic stuff in the garbage, like food waste, food scraps, paper, because it's going to compost in the land, or it's going to break down in the landfill anyway. What's wrong with that line of thinking? Because it sounds pretty good, right?
Landfills are designed to be hermetically sealed environments. And so what that means is that there's no oxygen. Everything is compressed. And so all that food waste in there is not going to break down. It's going to be like sealed.
Mm.
And to the point where I was reading about garbage archaeologists who like to go and see what's happening inside these landfills, and they open them up and they find like a container of guacamole that's still green,
Oh,
right? Because
whoa.
There's no
There's no
oxygen
oxygen. Oh my
there.
gosh.
So what that tells you is that landfills are like these mausoleums of our discarded
Yeah.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
And they're not good. Like how do we maintain these sites in perpetuity, indefinitely, and keep it from harming us, harming the landscape, the animals, the environment? This is all the leaking of the garbage juice. The problem is that the landfill is destined to be a problem to future generations.
Yeah.
So that's why I'd like to get away from this idea. I mean, there's no reason we need to have a landfill if we can deal with all the things that we wish to get rid of. We don't want them anymore.
Yeah.
I don't want this, piece of cardboard anymore. What's going to happen to it? Well, we can do something better than sending it to a landfill. And I know that it's overwhelming to folks to think about making a change this big. For me, doing a book about it, it was overwhelming. But I'm crazy, so
Well, we need crazy
I'm
people.
highly motivated.
You're highly
I'm
motivated.
highly motivated.
Heck yeah. Heck yes.
And I don't suggest that people try doing what we did. I suggest people work at it from the opposite side, which is to say, incorporate the small changes that feel good and then progress. Like, whatever you feel is doable, that's a change, whether it's, bringing little bags so you can put produce, your little cloth produce bags to the store, or when you go to your local shop that you like to get, meat from, you bring your own container. Of course, that segues into the fact that we did this project unknowingly. We started this project at the beginning of 2020. And
Unreal.
so
Unreal.
we didn't realize that the year was going to end up being very different than we originally envisioned. And
Yeah.
so I had all these wonderful plans and dreams of, bringing my bags places and bringing my containers places and driving all over creation to go find the people who would accommodate this zero waste lifestyle. All that disappeared almost overnight. A lot of the smaller shops closed. And the ones that were still open didn't want to talk to me about my
Yeah.
reusable containers. They didn't want me bringing those even near their doorstep. Even when we went to the supermarket, they were originally about to ban plastic bags. They brought them right back
Mm.
out. They didn't want to hear anything about my reusable bags. It was a very different experience than I expected. We had to pivot and go, okay, then what
Yeah.
does this mean? Now we're doing this yet again in a different way. So that ended up being a really wonderful thing, though. I think it caused me to really focus on it in a new way and
Yeah.
find better solutions.
Yeah, I didn't realize, when I started reading that it was going to be the COVID year when the book took place. So that was like unreal, unreal. But you did it. You did it. And during one of the hardest years you possibly could do it. So inspiring. So from you living zero waste for a year, do you feel like I know there's like a niche of zero waste on the internet, and there's people who hold up their jars of, this is all I generated in a year. Like there's a whole thing for it. There's a spot for
Yes.
everybody, and I love that about the internet. That's great. But like for normal people who have other things to do, you know, is
Yes.
this is it possible? Should we aspire to that? I mean, because I feel like when we aspire to something like that, maybe there's a danger of kind of beating ourselves up, and we don't meet it exactly like we feel like it should be met. Those expectations. Like, where do you kind of stand on that now, having gone through this? What is your life? What does your routine look like these days?
I'm still very stubborn. And I love the fact that every time we've done one of these projects, we go in one way and we come out changed. We come out different. And there is no going back because we now know things that we can't, it's like you can't unsee. You can't unknow the bad things that are happening
Yes.
with plastic, for example. I would say that for people who want to go zero waste, that's great. But I also think it's fine for people not to be. I think even the most, enthusiastic zero wasters will admit that in today's contemporary environment, even they cannot be 100% zero waste all of the time. And during the pandemic, you actually saw a lot of that. A lot of zero wasters were on social media saying, it's okay, folks.
Yeah.
These are extreme times and you can't beat yourself up about it. You have to, we have to just keep going and do the best you can. And that's the thing that I think I advise folks. I would do the things that you know to be really important, like keeping the plastic away from your food as much as possible. And the things, do the things that feel that you can do them, but don't beat yourself up for not being able to be a zero waste 100% person, because in today's contemporary environment, that's impossible
Yeah.
unless you want to, go be a hermit somewhere. And I don't. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I think I think it's very important to focus on individual action, on personal responsibility, but at the same time recognize that there's also the corporate responsibility that needs to be at work, and also legislative responsibility. And those are two other avenues that we can pursue. So we can be aware of, for example, legislation that might be going on in our state. There's actually a national bill about plastic, the break free from plastic bill that's being proposed, that would significantly help with that low hanging fruit that I talked about, the plastic packaging, the 40% of plastic produced every year. So to be aware of things like extended producer responsibility, which is a big mouthful and doesn't sound like anything, but extended producer responsibility is where we go to companies and say, guess what? You made this mess. You have to be responsible for its cleanup, instead of the individual consumers who really don't have a choice in many cases.
Yeah.
If I want to buy cheese, I can't buy it without plastic covering, right?
Yep.
So the people who made that plastic covering need to make provision for what happens to it at the end of its useful life. So extended producer responsibility is an important thing to be aware of, but it's also equally important to know that not all EPR is good, because the companies that create this stuff have caught on to this principle, and they say, oh, well, as part of this EPR bill, we're going to put chemical recycling in there. And chemical recycling means burning plastic. Burning plastic is not recycling. And there's a lot of there's like 8 or 9 different words for it. Pyrolysis, chemical recycling, waste to energy. It all means the same thing. It means we're going to take the plastic and we're going to burn it. And we're going to end up with, toxic ash in the air, and toxic ash as a byproduct that has to be landfilled anyway.
Yep.
So these are all bad options. Unfortunately, you can't just trust that. Again, we have a lot of trust in our society when it comes to these issues of recycling and what happens to things when they leave our site. And we need to realize that that system doesn't work. So we can't trust that all EPR is good EPR. So one good thing to do is check out sites like the Beyond Plastic folks. Beyond Plastics has a website, and I actually, in the course of doing our year of no garbage, I took a class from the head of Beyond Plastics, Judith Enck. She's a professor at Bennington College, and I took an online class, and it was called Beyond Plastics 101. And this is where I learned a lot of the stuff. I had been fumbling along through much of our year of no garbage, trying to ferret out information in a system that's not designed to deliver that information. And so when I got to the bottom of a lot of these issues was when I took her class, and she was able to say once and for all, no, this is not a good system. No, these things are not getting recycled as you suspected. And what can we do about it? And so Beyond Plastics is a terrific resource for finding out if legislation will really be addressing the concerns that we have.
Yes. It reminded me a lot in the book when you were talking about it, about just the industrial food system, which my audience is very familiar with, and how the labels don't mean quite what they say, and the corporations don't do quite what you think they're doing. And if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Like, there's a lot of that cover up feeling, grayish kind of ickiness. I don't know why I never thought of it before, but I think you were talking about big plastic and how they're literally like campaigning for more plastic. And I'm like, oh my gosh, here I thought, I kind of just assumed it was a necessary evil. And no, they're actually, it's like on purpose. Like, blew my mind.
Absolutely. In fact, by their own estimates, Big Plastic would like to triple their plastic production by 2050.
Oh,
Why?
yeah.
Why? What do we need all that plastic for? Well, because it's their full-time job to sell more of it.
Yeah. Yep. And they're good at it. they're doing a good job.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's why, it was my full-time job to try and avoid it. And I still couldn't do it 100% of the time. So people should be aware that it is that hard. It is that hard. So don't beat up on yourself. Do everything you can within, your ability, and then become aware of the larger issues, and vote accordingly.
Yes. Yes. You gave so many practical tips in the book. It was so good. But what were some of your favorite discoveries and replacements that you found during your year of no garbage, in terms of what you were like swapping out or getting, or easy switches that you could use instead of the obvious plastic option?
Okay. Let me see. One of my favorite things I already mentioned, which is switching to these beautiful refrigerator boxes that are Pyrex, that are glass. That's one of my most favorites because they're also very pretty and they're cheap. I love it. I can go
Yes.
buy one,
Yes.
for a couple bucks. What else? One of my, I don't know how many people are going to be willing to do this, but one of the things that I found I really love to do, and maybe I'm just, yeah, I'm out there. So I stopped using garbage bags.
Ah, okay.
I don't actually put a bin liner in. And the reason that I like it so much is it keeps me honest. What I
Mm,
do instead is and in fact, now that we have a garbage again, I should mention, um, so I have a garbage, and the only stuff that ever goes in there is single-use disposable plastic. And so if I have, food packaging, meat packaging, I'll rinse it off. I'll let it dry. I'm not like obsessive about it, but so it doesn't smell. I put everything in there, and it keeps me honest because a big black bag, a kitchen bin liner, it's
yeah.
like an invitation to,
Yep.
it sucks things in.
Yes, it
And
does.
what I found is that it keeps me honest. Now that's a sort of extreme measure. Another thing I do is I have to buy feed for my chickens, and I frequently am unable to find it in paper. Sometimes I can, and sometimes I get it in this multi-layer. It's a combination
Yeah.
of plastic and paper. So when it is time to empty my bin of single-use disposable plastic, that's what I put it in instead. I don't buy garbage bags anymore, and I use
Yep.
that instead. So I feel like that's at least, the best I can do is give that bag another life, another use.
Yes. And I know my audience we have plenty of chicken feed bags, paper and plastic, probably. So that's a great tip. I have to know, do you still like your ozone laundry thing? Are you still using that and enjoying that? Because I was really intrigued. I'd never heard of that before I read the book.
And I love it, as you can tell. I write about it like, ooh, I love my ozone laundry
Yeah.
thing. But, I go into all this detail because I was like, is this okay? Like, I
Right.
don't
That's what,
really know.
yeah. I was like, but if she, okay, I trust her, but she says it's okay. So I went and Googled it and looked it on Amazon, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I had to do a really deep dive, and so the short answer is yeah, it's fine, and that's good. I love it. I need to get a new one because, if I'm honest, since I wrote that, it conked out and broke, and my
Okay.
warranty's expired. So I got to go
Okay.
get another one.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know.
So I've been using in the interim, I've been using tablets that I buy from Blue Land,
I like Blue End.
and
Yeah.
I like them quite a bit. They come in packaging that is industrially compostable, and that's another issue that
Yes.
I get frustrated with because the idea of things being compostable is very misleading. A lot of the time, people, oh, it's compostable. That means that that's terrific, and we can just stop thinking about it. No, 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 no. Because if it goes to the landfill, remember, there's no oxygen. It's not going to break
Yep.
down. So if you put it in your home compost, frequently these items are industrially compostable only. They are not home compostable. So you'll go back a year later and that package will still be sitting there staring at you. It has to be industrially composted. Well, how do I get it to industrial compost?
$1 million question.
Yeah, and these facilities, they're not on every street corner. So, for example, we have a coffee shop nearby, and I write about this in the book, where they give out this packaging for coffee cups and food containers, and all of it says, "Yay, I'm compostable! Woohoo!" Well, that coffee shop is half an hour away from my house, and so and of course, if you're there getting this stuff in to-go cups, you're going somewhere.
Yeah.
And so they have a bin for industrial compost there in the shop. But that means I got to get in my car and drive a half an hour to take that coffee cup back.
Yeah.
That's not a system that seems very sustainable. So these are the details. This, like, the devil is in the details that people, generally speaking, in their average everyday lives, don't have time to investigate. And in fact, I called up the lady at the coffee shop, whoever answered the phone, and I'm like, so can I put this in my home compost? And she's like, I think so. The people who are using these products often do not know
Yep.
what the parameters are either. We're all living very busy, full, active lives, running around, and sometimes it's unreasonable, I think, to expect that we're all going to do this deep dive on, is my ozone cleaner for my laundry okay, or is
Right.
the compostable really going to compost? So that's why I love the idea of I can look into all these answers, hopefully put them in an entertaining format in this book, and people can use that as the cliff notes as a springboard. They can jump off and take that information and do good things with it.
Yeah. And that's what one of the things that struck me as I was reading is how much work you had to do to get the answers, because they were not easy to find answers. It wasn't like you called up these companies, even like the plastic companies, no one could give you a straight answer. No one was giving you what you actually needed. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that was intense, just the research side of things. And that's not
Yes,
something a
yes.
normal consumer is not going to want to do that or be able to
No,
do that. Yeah.
no. And I think a lot of people will say, I would love to go zero waste, or I'd love to do some of these things, but I don't have the time. I don't have the bandwidth. I just don't. And I'd say that's okay. That's okay. The first step towards meaningful change is awareness.
Yep.
And I think that is where we all start. And then going through life, you will see things differently. And you might not say, you might not be able to go to that extra, store that has the zero packaging, that has the fill your own,
Yeah.
oats or whatever. But that's okay. That's okay, because you're starting where you are. And that's what we all need to do.
Yes. And
You
that
have
awareness
that
is,
information now,
yes.
and moving forward, you'll have the awareness.
And that's everything. I mean, I think this whole journey, everything I've ever done with a homestead, gardening, cooking, all of it has been just that first step of awareness, and the person who kind of opened up my mind, whether it was a book or a podcast interview, and just got me thinking. We just have to start thinking through what we're doing instead of just kind of mindlessly going through life. I think that's where the magic begins.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I think there's always this moment of discomfort when you're trying to do something in a way that's different than you've ever done before, and maybe different than everyone around you is doing it. And it's important to sort of like allow yourself to feel that discomfort. Like I, for example, get really shy when I'm asking people for something special. So I'm going to the store, and I'm like, I want to buy a salad, but I don't want the plastic clamshell. So I go to the deli, and I go with my container, and I'm like, would you please put it in this container? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I get really like they're going to get mad at me,
Right. Right.
I'm making their job more difficult. And in fact, that doesn't happen. People are usually awfully nice and very helpful. And if they say no, they say no. But a lot of the time they don't. A lot of the time they're like, oh yeah, we can do that.
Yeah. I think that's true for so many things. And just, yeah, like you said, sitting in that discomfort and being willing to look like a weirdo sometimes. It's okay to be a weirdo. I think most of my homestead crew were used to being weird. So this will just fit right into everything else you're doing, you guys. You'll be fine. It's not even going to feel that different. I mean, if you're milking a cow, I mean, come on, this is like nothing. Ask for the refillable container. So,
or asking your store to carry the milk in the refillable container,
yes,
for example.
yes, yes.
It's very funny what people can get shy about, or like, oh, I can't do that. Yeah.
Totally.
So it's one thing at a time.
Yep. Baby steps. Baby steps. Oh my goodness, so good. I wanna be respectful of time here, but I have my one final question for you is just a little bit of encouragement potentially for the audience. So one thing I think that I've struggled with is, I'll be doing my little steps, getting paper bags or trying not to get this plastic piece or, doing all the little bits. And then you go watch a documentary like The Story of Plastic and you see the mountains of garbage and it's just like a kick in the gut because you're like, nothing I'm doing matters. What do you do when you start feeling that, or what words of encouragement would you have for someone who's thinking, I like this idea, but I don't think it's going to help anything?
I think I belong to an anti-plastic waste advocacy group. And that's one of the things we talk about a lot is sort of like getting down, getting depressed, feeling like what you're doing doesn't matter. And I think one of the nice things about being part of a group like that is we can turn to each other. Um, and and when one of us is feeling not so optimistic, other people can rally. I also think that it's very important um, to speak up, but to maintain your sense of humor. Like, when we're writing an angry letter to the newspaper or to a corporation, that's what a lot of folks, in my group, we're constantly talking about advocacy. And I don't know if that might be beyond where your listeners are at, but I think it's comparable to say, you get down sometimes and you're like, I don't know. I think it's important to remember the humanity of these issues and to maintain your sense of humor and joy. And I went to a protest down in New York City last fall, and what I noticed was that we're all going along. We were protesting Coca-Cola's support of the financial support of the COP27 United Nations climate conference. So we're like, this is ridiculous, right? Coke is one of the biggest problems when it comes to plastic waste. So what I found was that when we were singing and when we were smiling, people would engage with us.
Mm.
And when we were angry and when we were chanting, people did not want to hear what we had to say. They didn't want to take our flyers. They would walk right past. And so I think finding the joy in what you're doing and what you care about is so important. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's great advice. And you do such a great job of that in your book. It's engaging and it's funny and it's warm and it's inspiring, but in a way that makes you feel like you can do it. So well done. And thank you for that.
Oh, I'm so glad, because that's one of the biggest things I did not want. I'm conveying a lot of information that can be pretty heavy. And
Yeah.
so I wanted it not to feel doom and gloom. I wanted
Yes.
it to feel hopeful and here's what you can do next.
Yes. And it did. It did. So can you let everyone know where they can find a copy of this wonderful book and also where they can connect with you online if they'd like to follow along with what you're doing?
Oh, of course. Yes. So I write a blog at eveschaub.com. I am on all the social media that I can possibly handle.
I
I'm
hear
on
ya.
TikTok.
Yep.
I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, you name it. I've got an author page on Facebook. It's at Eve Schaub, usually on all those things. Eve O Schaub sometimes. And to buy my book, you can find it in your local independent bookstore. You can find it at Amazon. You can find it at Barnes & Noble. Most of the major book purveyors have it or can get it for you. Of course, I always love when people buy it at their local independent bookstore, best of all.
Same. I always push that first. I'm like, go there first. Sure. Yep. Give them your business. Amazon doesn't need you, but they do. So,
Exactly.
yep. Yep. Well, Eve, this was so fantastic. Thank you for joining me today. I'm feeling extra inspired moving forward, and I hope everyone listening just has a little extra motivation to start thinking. Just start thinking through what's going in the garbage can and what you're buying and where that plastic is showing up. And remember that awareness is that first step. So, thanks for coming on. This was a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I had fun.